This is Photographing the West podcast, the podcast for people who love to explore the western highways and byways while photographing the landscape and wildlife. And now here's your host, Kirby Flanagan.
Welcome to episode number 86 of the Photographing the West podcast, now available in video as well as audio format. Today's guest is California-based fine art landscape photographer Richard Wong. Richard's love of the landscape, particularly the western landscape, can't talk this morning, is evident in his larger format prints using specialized printing processes. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Kirby. Thanks for inviting me. Seems like you've had a lot of great guests and that have a real long resume on your show.
Yeah, I've been fortunate. Started out with a few of my friends to practice on and evolved from there, I guess. So talk about your evolution as a photographer. Were you always a fine art photographer, or did you start like the rest of us?
I think I started off just like anyone else, or at least how everyone I know. I started off when I was in my late teens, early 20s, when I was in college, about 20 years ago at this point. And my family and I had traveled to Sequoia National Park, Olympic National Park, and Joshua Tree. And so I would do those things either on summer vacations or on the weekend when I wasn't going to school. So at some point I thought, okay, it would be nice if I had some pictures to show for it. So eventually I just started borrowing my dad's Nikon, I think it's N8008S. It was a 35 millimeter film camera. And so started off shooting print film initially. Then I discovered slide film, and I liked the way it looked, the Fuji Velvia and Provia at the time. So I started off shooting that. Did film for, let's say, maybe four or 5 years. Then eventually I also picked up a digital camera along the way. They weren't very good back then, but I actually liked that a lot more. I felt it was, though at the time they didn't look as good as film, I felt it was very liberating to see something right away on the screen and also be able to not just be locked in, to a certain film template, but be able to, adjust things, after the fact. With that said, I don't do like an extensive amount of post-processing like a lot of people do nowadays, but I do make an effort to learn it. So when I do need to optimize some images, I have the techniques and the skill set to do that. But with that said, my goal is to try to keep, realistic, try to keep, within close to what I saw or how I'd like to portray a scene, but not add things that weren't there or stretch mountains when that's not really what I saw.
Sure.
I guess I'm not really answering a question, but but after that point, I went on a road trip with my cousin, probably 2 or 3 years after that point, and he was a photographer at the time. Fortunately, he's no longer alive, but he brought along a copy of Outdoor Photographer, and I saw a photo of Patagonia. I had never seen a photo like that before, and he told me it was by Galen Rowell, and that was his style of shooting. Oh, that's pretty interesting. I didn't really read the article or the magazine at the time, but then a year or two later, I was at the Ansel Adams Gallery in Yosemite when I was at the bookshelf. I saw this name Galen Rowell. Oh, that sounds very familiar. So I ended up buying his book, and that was the book, The Art of Adventure. I think it was Galen Rowell's Vision. So I bought that book and I read it all within a day or two, and I was hooked after that point. I was really inspired to try to learn more about this photography thing, and that pretty much started my journey to what I do now.
Yeah, I was a great admirer of Galen Rowell too. I learned of him early in my photographic career too, and was a great inspiration. Seemed like a great guy, and tragically died, as the story goes. So
yeah, I was really unfortunate that year I read that book and bought all his books. He ended up dying that same year, like later on. So at that point, I thought, oh, it would be great to take a workshop someday from him. But I never had that opportunity to, but I've since met some of his former assistants. I took a class by one of his former gallery managers for a semester long and learned how to print there. And also Gary Crabb, who's been on the show, I developed a friendship with him over the years, and like know him quite well. It's like,
Yeah.
but even though I couldn't meet Galen, I've heard heard a number of stories from both of them.
Yeah, likewise. So, what led you to fine art photographer in particular?
Well, I think like a lot of people that try to monetize their photography, at least at the time I started, it was, everyone did stock photography, and because agencies were still paying well, or you could license them directly, for pretty good money still back then. So I pursued that for about a decade. Then at some point it became, kind of a lost cause. Like, I still license quite a bit, but the average sale, the price is, maybe a tenth of what it used to be.
Right.
So it's not really worth it just to travel and shoot stuff just for stock. I mean, if you happen to have it, that's great. But to put money and time into it, it's just not worth the effort at this point. It's like, so at some point I just kind of gave up. Okay, well, stock's kind of over with. Let's do something else in my life for a while. So I just kept shooting, but wasn't so concerned about making money with photography for about 4 or 5 years, until about like 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years ago, I decided, okay, um, there's some new types of print methods out there. I'm seeing a lot of these things at art shows and at galleries. It looks really interesting, a lot more sophisticated than when I was doing this a decade ago, creating prints and, just selling loose prints to people and letting them frame it or frame it myself. So I got really interested in that. Then I also thought too, well, this also seems to be, the last thing of photography, or the last aspect of photography where people are still willing to pay real money for it, and not, want to pay $1 for it or $20 for it. So I thought, okay, well, if I offer like the best and most premium type of prints I could offer, using all the skills I had learned over the previous decade or two, I could, try to market to a more affluent audience and still make money, from my photography, as opposed to having to resort to teaching workshops and being a celebrity, basically, like how a lot of people are doing it nowadays, which I have no interest in.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right. Fine art photography, wedding photography, and the workshop photography is about where it's at these days.
Yeah, I see a lot of my peers there. I see, they kind of started off the same time I did. We all started off like on the online forums on Nature Photographers Network. So a lot of these guys that have a super big following and teach workshops now, they're doing the same thing I was like 15 years ago. So it's interesting to see like the different paths people have taken. Like a lot of these guys, they have like 500,000 followers on Instagram or 100,000 followers on Facebook, and they basically, all they do is just teach workshops. They don't sell images, and some of them don't even have very many images. It's just all about, just paying to, having people pay for their travel, essentially. It's like, but that sort of thing I'm not really interested in. I've got a family here, and quite honestly, I'm an introvert. I just like to create art.
Right.
I don't want to be a tour guide.
Right.
Not really the type of lifestyle I want to live, and I just want to shoot photos. I don't want to worry about babysitting people in the field, to be honest. Like, I mean, I do like giving lectures and giving presentations in like a, like a classroom or a lecture hall sort of thing. But when it comes to being a tour guide, that's not really my thing. And nor do I want to be a celebrity either, and be scrutinized for every single thing I say.
Yeah, that's the downside. All right.
Yeah.
So, what distinguishes fine art photography from any of these other genres we were talking about?
Well, I would say, fine art photography, there's a difference between prints, just putting up on the internet, and also high-end prints. The majority of people like don't print at all, for one, or never have, and or nor do they know how. And there's a much bigger bucket out there, that they may submit stuff to Fine Art America or Art.com, and these heavily commoditized e-commerce sites that sell commercial grade artwork, mass produced artwork for very low prices. But it's a very hands-off process, and the quality of that's very hit or miss. For me, I've never wanted to go that route. To me, that kind of feels like stock photography. It's just kind of like a commoditized product. So fine art photography, to me, it's about being methodical about your process, using the best materials you can, and being very careful, and it's also a bit of customer service as well. So I think it's just a much higher end product created with more care and quality control, and something that, if you think about, somebody may want to pay a few $1,000s for a print, or even a few $100s for a print. There's only so many people, a certain percentage of people out there that can afford that sort of thing. So if you're going to spend that sort of money, I think a photographer owes it to your client there to really put effort into creating the best artwork, not necessarily just the art itself, but like the whole process of doing it. Create the best art piece that you can to deliver to your client.
Sure, that makes sense. So you make some really large images. What gear do you use to get those?
So right now I'm shooting with the Sony Alpha, the mirrorless cameras with Canon lenses. Initially started off with Canon DSLRs, but at some point they weren't really making the same progress when it came to like sensor technology as Nikon and Sony. Sony and Nikon, I believe, still use the same sensor.
Right.
So the Sony cameras, they're like a third of the price as the Canon equivalent. So, okay, well, they're making a better sensor here. I don't want to fully jump on board and buy all new lenses, because those cost a lot more than the camera does. And I still have a whole bag full of Canon lenses that are quite good. So why not just put a Metabones adapter on the Sony and give it a shot? So I had the Sony Alpha, the A7R1, which had great image quality, but I was not a fan of the ergonomics, and there were some other issues with the camera I just didn't like. So I had that one for about 2 years until I sold that one last year. Then I got the 2 because it was on sale, and this one's a lot better. Like the image quality is still good, but the ergonomically better, and didn't have a lot of the same issues that the version 1 had. So I think they're on version 4 now, which someday I'll probably get, but I'm kind of a bargain shopper. I don't like to buy things when they first come out and pay full price for it. So that's my main camera. Then I use the Fujifilm cameras as a backup camera and for my travel camera. I think I have the X-T2, and I'm a really big fan of Fujifilm. I've had their cameras for probably about like 7 or 8 years now. They look like a Leica and have that portability, but have all the functionality of like any other DSLR camera.
Did you look at the A9 when you were looking at a new camera?
The A9?
Sony A9?
Oh, I'm not super familiar. I stick with the A7 R series, mainly because they're full frame and have a lot of megapixels, which for landscape that typically is more ideal. So not like I don't really stay on top of like all the camera gear out there, but the ones that I am interested in, I do pay attention to those. But like I won't admit to knowing everything that's out there.
Yeah, well, that's all right. Not everybody's a Europhile, nor do you need to be one to take good photos. So obviously,
I know. Yeah, I give these lectures sometimes to these camera clubs, and I've also spoke at the Sierra Club, and people always like to ask a lot of gear and technique type questions. And quite honestly, I sometimes I forget or don't even remember or didn't even know at the time what I was using. It's just kind of automatic for me. I don't necessarily think about all the technical process or take notes of it. Because I've been doing this for 20 years. It's kind of just automatic for me.
Sure.
So people ask these questions, and quite honestly, they may know more about that stuff than me.
But you know how to use the equipment you have, so
Yeah. I kind of prefer to keep a limited tool set and try to master that, as opposed to learning everything, every functionality, and every piece of thing that comes out.
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of my philosophy for it. For me, it's about the experience and trying to create the artwork, as opposed to the necessarily like the equipment or the technical aspect of it.
Right. So you said you don't do much post-processing, but what software do you use when you?
Yeah, so my process, I do use post processing, but I don't do like heavy manipulation like some of these people do. But for my process, I use raw. I shoot in raw for basically every single thing I shoot, even if it's just travel photos or family photos. Never know when you might need to make a print or just want to have a good file. So I just prefer to shoot raw, and memory is quite cheap these days, so I don't see a reason why I wouldn't do that. Sorry, there's an airplane flying overhead. So I import my raw files into Lightroom. Then I just do some basic. I pick the images I want to use through Lightroom, sort them out through there, and prioritize them by give them a star rating system, or just check off the ones I want to use. Then I'll do some light processing of the raw file in Lightroom. Then I'll export it as a TIF file, a 16-bit TIF file. Then I'll import it into Photoshop, which then I'll start using luminosity mask and saturation mask to control the dynamic range and the saturation there. Then that's pretty much my process there. I don't do any pre-sharpening before I decide how I want to output the file. I prefer to create my master files with no noise reduction and no sharpening until I know what I want to do with it later on. So I'll create this master file that doesn't have those destructive edits. Then if I decide I need to make a print or license something or submit to an agency, then I'll apply all of the noise reduction and sharpening if necessary to the file based on the output size.
So how do you?
Seems like I lost my.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah, okay.
It's the only trouble, those things they don't want to stay in.
Yeah, yeah. My hand got stuck on it and came out.
So how do you manage to make those ultra sharp large images that you do?
So the majority of landscapes I shoot, or basically all of them, are shot on a tripod. I use a Induro carbon fiber tripod. So I've also used a Manfrotto way back in the past, but that one wasn't very good. But nowadays I'm shooting with the Induro carbon fiber tripod. It's quite good. So I think capturing a sharp file is important to begin with, and having adequate depth of field if that's what you want to do. And from there, it's a matter of capturing good exposures, capturing all the dynamic range you may want, and try not to get too much noise, and have sharp files. And for me, most of my images are single file images. I try not to blend too much if necessary and do too much of those CGI type of techniques that a lot of people do. And the other thing too, I notice a lot of photographers on the internet, or at least on social media, like to do really dark images, super underexposed, and have really moody type stuff. That type of file doesn't print very well, nor does it look very good on somebody's wall. So I think if you're going to make a print file, it has to be a good exposure for one, and not be primarily dark tones, unless unless it's like a black and white image. So that's the first aspect. The other thing beyond that is just make sure that you have study up on sharpening techniques, and make sure you do proper noise reduction. Then also look at your file at 100% and just look at before you make a print, spend time like reviewing every square inch of this file, make sure that all the details are good, and if they don't, try to apply some techniques to certain areas to clean that up if you have to.
So how large are your files right out of the camera?
So the Sony files, don't remember at this point. I think they're like 7,000 something pixels, which I think the native resolution is probably like a 20 by 30,
Okay.
300 DPI. I think that's the native resolution. So that's a really good starting point. If you need to make 40 by 60s or anything larger, that's not even, that's probably barely 2x over the native resolution. So that's a really good file to work with.
So you don't use any special software to enlarge them or anything that way?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like on Photoshop, some of their native upsizing algorithms is the bicubic smoother. That's the default one I used to use a long time ago because that was the original one. Then more recently I was using preserve details, which a little bit more, I think a little bit more effective at creating some sharper details.
Yeah.
But then I've been testing the Topaz AI Gigapixel. I started testing that a few months ago and recently bought that, and that's way better than Adobe's upsizing algorithms. And if you haven't tried that, I highly recommend testing the AI Gigapixel. This thing's pretty incredible. It's not going to create a miracle out of nothing. You have to have something to work with. But if you have a reasonably detailed file, it's pretty amazing how they could enlarge it and look really good, like much better than your file would look otherwise at 100%. So the only drawback to this piece of software, it takes a very long time compared to Photoshop, which maybe 10 seconds or so. It could take anywhere from 10 minutes to 20 minutes to process some of these files, or to blow up these files. And I think I'm probably missing something, but if I remember, I'll elaborate on that.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay. I
Go ahead.
remember. Yeah, the other thing to keep in mind too, when most art buyers, they're looking at it from an artistic standpoint and not necessarily putting their nose up to the print like photographers do. And so what I may think is not good or subpar or garbage, it may never get noticed, or nor would most people even care, to be honest, unless you're a photographer. With that said, I think if you're going to offer art, I don't think you should use that and just put out subpar artwork out there. I think if it doesn't meet your standard, you shouldn't put it out there, even if nobody knows it.
Sure. Yeah. Most of us are kind of pixel peepers when it comes right down to it. So let's see, what else do I want to talk about here? Oh, yeah. You do your own printing or do you send everything out?
When I took this semester-long class, I had to make hundreds of prints to create a 12 print portfolio. So, they had their own lab and own print, but I had to create my own printing and profiling and all that stuff. And I learned after that class, I never wanted to print my own stuff again.
Yeah, I went through that too.
Yeah. So it was a great learning experience, but managing your own printer, the inks get clogged up, you constantly have to optimize this. It just that's an entire new skill set and job in its own. And I probably would have quit a long time ago had I decided to take that route. So I outsourced the printing, but I do work with printers where there's they I have try to maintain some sort of dialogue with these printers, and and they give me feedback on their prints too, rather than automated process like Shutterfly. You send it to them, they'll send it back, and whatever you send is what you get back. The
Right.
labs I like working with, they'll give you feedback on your files there and let you know whether you should work on it or whether they give you feedback if you want to do something yourself.
Right. Yeah, I've used some of those too, and they're much more technically proficient than I'll ever be or want to be.
Yeah, it's some of this equipment too to create these different substrates. It's just no regular person would have the space nor the money to invest in that equipment. I would say it's probably hundreds of thousands of dollars or $1 million+ for some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Like back in the day, like Galen Rowell was printing on those lightjet prints. That machine, I think, cost probably $400,000 or so, and they no longer make it. But back then, it was costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. So
Right.
the average person wouldn't be buying that sort of equipment.
So how did you begin to use these specialized media that you use for your large format prints?
Well, it was maybe about 10 years ago. I was at a Toastmasters meeting, which is a public speaking. I guess I don't know if it's a class or a seminar. I was part of this Toastmasters group for probably a year or two. So this was in Los Angeles at the time. And so we went to one guy's house one day. It was normally held at the Rand Corporation, but for whatever reason, one day we had to have it at one of the members' house. And he had this house in the Pacific Palisades. So I went up to his house. I noticed, oh, this guy's a photographer too. So he had some really interesting. Yeah, I'd never seen canvas prints before, so his whole living room was full of these thin canvas prints. It looked quite interesting to me. It wasn't as detailed as a paper print, but the presentation style, it really popped off the wall, and it looked a lot more contemporary than the traditional frame and paper matte sort of look.
Right.
So that kind of got me to think, okay, well there's other things now out there that you could do with your prints. And so I didn't do anything with it at the time, but then eventually I started playing around with the canvas prints. And I had those for a number of years, but then about 2 years ago when I decided I wanted to actually spend time focusing on fine art as opposed to primarily focus on stock, I started visiting like all the art galleries I could encountered, and went to a lot of art fairs in the area and other areas, and looked at what people were offering, and no one was offering paper prints anymore by that point, other than the ones you see in the $40 bin.
Yeah.
So everyone was offering Chromalex or some sort of metal prints for the most part. Then at some of the higher end galleries like Peter Lick and some of these other galleries, they would offer acrylic face mounting. So once I decided to focus on this, I started looking at those sorts of print substrates, and I spent several $1,000s testing them all myself before I was comfortable offering this. So that's pretty much how I ended up here. I just liked the presentation style of ready to hang prints. It's a more contemporary style look, and it's more eye catching, and it costs a lot more to produce, and it looks like something that's worthy of spending money on.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, and so I'm sure maybe 5 years from now there'll probably be some other types of print mediums that make this like antiquated, but for now, like this stuff, this is pretty much the most expensive type of prints that someone could buy. So that's kind of how I ended up here. In order to attract an affluent buyer, you have to know what they want and know what looks good for them, and see what other people that are doing this sort of thing, what they're offering, and offer something similar or better if possible.
All right. So talk a little bit more about these two processes. I'm not familiar with the acrylic at all, and I gather the other one's a metal print. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's multiple types of metal prints out there, and I believe most people are probably offering dye sublimation Chromalex prints, and if they're not, they're probably just a Fuji Crystal Archive print that's mounted on the metal. Sometimes it's kind of hard to tell the difference, but the one I use is the dye sublimation Chromalex prints, and what this is, it's basically a print that's printed on transfer paper, and what they do is they tape it to this Chromalex metal, and they use a heat transfer. They basically bake in the print like a tattoo onto the metal, where the print that was on the paper is now transferred over to this archival piece of metal, and it's has the shiny type look, but it's not like super reflective where you necessarily see your face in it. So it's quite eye catching, and and for me, I like using the edge mount prints, which is more at the box print, as opposed to like the thin sheet of metal that's hanging loose on top of a rear frame. To me, that looks really cheap, and that's not really a fan of that presentation style. And so the benefits of that, it's a little more durable than the acrylic prints, where if you were to hang prints in a public setting or do an art fair, that's probably the reason why you see a lot of those at art fairs. They don't get scratches easily, or if gets a little bit wet, or if somebody happens to spit on it or drop water on it, it's not going to damage the print necessarily. And so it's good for public settings, and it's quite eye-catching. The acrylic face mount prints, that's a much more high-end print, and that's and for me, I work with a lab. They print on a transparency, and they mount it on a piece of museum grade acrylic, and in between a couple of pieces of hard backing material. Then there's a rear frame on the back there. Then basically this whole process creates a very interesting looking print, where if there's any sort of lighting, whether it's gallery lighting or external lighting, it has kind of like a glowy sort of look to it. And the nice thing about this museum grade acrylic is it doesn't reflect nearly as much as like a glossy print does. So you have like the benefits of the glossy stuff without the drawbacks of it. I mean, and those are very expensive to produce. And I like the way it look. I have several of them in my own house. If you look in the background there, you can see there's a frame back there. That one is a framed acrylic face mount print.
Okay. Are there any labs that you feel comfortable recommending, and how much does it cost to have a print made?
Yeah, so I've used a number of labs over. I probably worked like 6 or 7 different labs over the years, but right now there's a lab in for the Chromalex prints. There's a lab on the East Coast that I work with. They have a really quick turnaround time, but they have good customer service, and I like their offering. Then the lab for the acrylic face mounts is based out of Las Vegas.
Okay.
And they have really good customer service too, which is one reason why I like using them.
Maybe if you wouldn't mind, you could send me your names and contact information for those labs, and I'll put them in the show notes.
Okay, sure
In
thing.
case somebody's interested.
Okay,
So for like a 16 by 20 print, what would that cost you in acrylic or in the metal?
Let's see. I actually I keep a spreadsheet here. I know that some artists say that you shouldn't treat prints like a retail business, but for me, I mean, if you want to make money, you have to know what stuff costs. So like
Right.
so let me see if I can remember off the top of my head. Yeah, okay, my sheet's loading right now, but if I can remember off the top of my head, I think a 16 by 24 acrylic, at least what I'm offering here, may cost like 240-ish or more dollars, I would say.
Okay. So definitely
Yeah,
not cheap.
yeah, and the metal prints are probably about half that price.
Okay. Yeah, metal prints used to be really expensive, but I think they've come down some over the years.
Yeah, probably because of the competition. Like, there's a lot of labs that offer metal prints these days.
Yeah.
Okay, so actually, let me see here. Okay. Yeah, the 16 by 24 acrylic may cost about $275, $280 or so.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you go about marketing something like that? I mean, that's not something your average buyer is going to just plunk down their credit card for.
Yeah, most of my marketing and sales come from my website, and
Okay.
so I have a background in marketing, so I've that's actually how I got interested in selling my work, primarily through the internet. And so people find me on Google or through word of mouth from other photographers I had met online, and that's primarily where most of my sales come from.
Okay. So you have you gone through the process of building up an email list and all those kinds of things and the
Yeah,
SEO and all that good stuff?
yeah, I have an email list on many of the pages on my site. You could sign up for my email list, so that's the primary way I get the people sign up for my list. I know there's a lot of people out there that just kind of add everyone they know to their mail list, but technically that's actually illegal to do that. You're supposed to get consent from people before you add to a list, either through implied consent or signing up directly. So that's pretty much how I get all the people on my list. They sign up for the list themselves, or they sign up through one of my other services I use, where they gave over their contact information.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned the marketing background. Did you have some business courses too in college and all that stuff?
Yeah, I majored. I have a business degree from undergrad. I majored in marketing.
Okay.
I also have a master's degree in advertising too. So like, yeah, I do have a background in marketing, and I've spent a number of years working with corporate companies and clients, doing their SEO work, content marketing strategy, and other things. So yes, I do have a marketing background.
Yeah. Well, that's got to help these days.
Yeah,
As
pretty
much.
much. I think if you're going to do any sort of marketing, if there's a lot of marketers that have been around for many years that they kind of work in branding and never really worked on the digital side. I feel like these days it's kind of impossible to build a career in marketing or even build a business of any sort, or even as a photographer, if you don't put any effort in trying to learn marketing or digital marketing, because people are not, magazines barely exist these days, and people are not watching TV commercials. And first, it's too expensive for the average person to run a TV commercial, first of all. But then secondly, people don't do print ads anymore because people are not buying magazines anymore. So, it's all on the internet. If you're not spending time either on social media sites, your own website, or on Google getting people, you're not going to have any sort of customers, or you're not going to have anyone know who you are.
Right. Yeah. That's almost a full-time job in and of itself.
Yeah, to say the least.
Do you have any help with all that, or you're doing all that yourself?
Yeah, I'm just a one-man shop here. My wife is a pharmacist, so so she is off doing her own thing, and she has no interest in marketing nor my artwork all that much. So some of the pieces I have in my house, she did pick, but she doesn't have like a much interest in art at all, to be honest. So it's just my own thing.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So have you been affected by the pandemic at all, as far as business-wise or photography-wise?
Yeah,
If
that's a good question. Yeah, I'm just reading through my notes here. Yeah, just give me a second. Yeah, I've heard from a lot of friends and also some of the people I follow on the internet, and seems like everyone, that teaches workshops, they're heavily impacted. I don't know if
Right.
anyone right now is actually even teaching workshops. I know a few of them are starting to do some some local workshops, but for 3 or 4 months there, I don't think anyone was running workshops, or if they were, they probably shouldn't have been doing it. And given that how most photographers, all they do is teach workshops, I imagine a lot of them are struggling right now. And the travel industry in particular, it's hard to foresee it coming back to even half or even full strength, for at least probably another year, I would guess. So I'm not sure what a lot of these people are going to do with that. And so, I know a lot of people I know, have suffered from that. For me in particular, I've a noticeable, decline in number of inquiries that have come in compared to what I was getting before, in the past 3 or 4 months. And prior to that, I was very optimistic for 2020. I had just literally 2 days before California, or Gavin Newsom announced the shelter in place and shut the whole state down. I had just hung a dozen prints in a gallery, literally 2 days before that. It's yeah, who knows what's going to happen with that? So it may just be a lost cause at this point. But so clearly nothing else happening with that gallery at this point. Prints are still there, but nothing moving there. Yeah, I was in the early stages of talking with a company in decorating their tasting rooms too. Prior to that too, and there's no construction going on and no commercial business or no tasting rooms going on at this point. So that, I think that project's on hold at this point. What else? Yeah, and also I had several inquiries prior to that too for corporate office design projects. I don't think any progress is made on that stuff either. So and so for me, yeah, not so great the past 2 months.
Yeah.
Just like most people, I would say.
Good thing to have a wife that's employed, huh?
Yeah. I'm just at home taking care of my kids at this point. It's
Yeah.
but yeah, my wife works full time, and we're doing okay. I don't have much to complain about.
Yeah. The world needs pharmacists always.
Yeah, yeah, that's just one of those things that there's always going to be a need for that.
Yeah. Good. Job security.
Yeah, that definitely helps. All the things I've done for a living over the years, that very little job security there.
Yeah. So you shoot mostly Western landscapes, I think, looking at your website.
Yeah. I was born and raised in California, so clearly, naturally, most of my images or more than half of them are from here. Then I have a decent collection of images from Canada. I've traveled there like almost 10 times by now. Then I've also, in the past 10 years, I've been doing more travel. I've been to Italy several times. And last year with I think my son was, I think he was two and a half at the time. We did an 18-day road trip through the Southwest. So like I
Oh,
hadn't been to the Southwest in about maybe 14 years or so prior to that. So did a lot of shooting there, a lot of sunrises and sunsets on that trip. When I travel with family, I try to keep the middle of the day open for family time. Then
sure.
the edges of the day is more for my time. So in order to get that in, I try to stay relatively close to the places I want to shoot. Um, and so that was a really fun trip. I had been to the Southwest several times prior to that, and most of these parks. Some of them I hadn't before, like Monument Valley and Canyon de Chelly I'd never been to. But my wife had only been to the Grand Canyon Sedona, so for her, almost all of that trip was brand new for her. So I had a lot of fun showing my family around there. The year prior for our anniversary, did about a 2 week, no, I think, yeah, about a 2 week trip or maybe a week and a half trip to Grand Teton, Yellowstone. I
Yeah.
had been to both too several times. My wife had never been there, and obviously my son had never been there. And so we had a lot of fun on that trip. And it was nice to actually stay in the park for Yellowstone. We stay at the Old Faithful Inn for about 4 or 5 days. It's very busy there, but it's really nice to have a very convenient home base there, and basically wake up, stroll out of bed, walk out at sunrise, and go shoot all these geysers and have nobody around. That's
All right.
I think the secret to shooting Yellowstone is just go there for sunrise or sunset, because in the middle of the day it's super busy in most places unless you're hiking the backcountry. But it's surprisingly empty for sunrise and even sunset, like almost everywhere you go in Yellowstone. My guess is a lot of these tourists are probably staying outside the park or just there for the day. That's my guess. So
Or they don't
if
want to
you're,
get up early.
yeah, there's that too. Yeah, clearly that. Like you go out for sunrise, even at Old Faithful, and literally there may not be anyone there at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. So which is really fun.
Yeah, I've experienced that too. And being the only photographer, or maybe one other photographer
Yeah.
out there at that time of day.
Yeah, and like fortunately my wife is quite understanding and she allows me to travel solo occasionally. So like in October I went to New England to go shoot the fall color. That's something I always wanted to do, and go see the fall colors in Vermont in particular. So I went there for about a week while my wife was pregnant. I think in her third trimester. So like that was any later than that, I wouldn't be able to go. So like, and she
Yeah.
stayed home taking care of the kid while I, spent a week by myself, experiencing the fall color. And that was actually a much more difficult shoot than I expected. Like out in the West, most of us were used to seeing wide open landscapes and vistas and sunsets, and there's elevation here. It's
Right.
not too hard to find things to shoot. In Vermont, New Hampshire, it was like, I'd shot the Appalachians before and shot a lot of forest before, but it was just a different sort of experience. Like, it's not as easy to find like, hiking trails or even know what to shoot there. Like it's a lot of private property and tons of trees everywhere you go. It's so unless you did a lot of research in advance, I think you would just be kind of driving around and hoping for the best. So it took me probably a few days before I finally figured out what I was doing there. Like it was quite an interesting challenge. It was very beautiful, but very difficult to shoot, in my
You know, one of the things I like about your work is you shoot a thing that everybody and their brothers shot, but you managed to get your own take on it and make something unique, which
Oh,
isn't
thank you.
easy.
Yeah. The majority of my work, I try to, shoot things that, or even locations that most tourists don't. But then the ones that seem to get a lot of attention are the ones that people seem to recognize a lot. So I try to balance out the obscure stuff with the the more popular things like but like if I'm going to show photos of something or a location that a lot of other people or everyone else has shot, if I'm going to show it, I'm going to try my best to make it look a bit different or make it put my own twist on it to some degree. And so there's a lot of photographers out there that focus on quote unquote fine art that kind of think iconic photography is beneath them. At various points in my development, I've thought that way too. But nowadays, I kind of enjoy all landscape photography. I try to keep an open mind to all of it, and whether anyone wants to admit it or not, I think every nature photographer has shot iconic landscapes before, and so and it's one of those things. I think it's just unavoidable, and if you're going to do it, you might as well try to enjoy it.
Sure. Well, there's a reason they're iconic. They're usually quite grand places. So
yeah, they're amazing. Like some of the world's most amazing locations are these iconic places. If I'm being honest here, like as creative as looking at a picture of rocks and some of this more intimate landscapes, if you're looking at something for the first time, just put the camera aside. Like I think almost everyone would choose to look at like Artist Point in Yellowstone or Mesa Arch and Canyonlands. Like these places are really amazing and really unique. Like there's a reason why they're popular. And so I think you're kind of depriving yourself of experience if you're just deliberately trying to avoid visiting these places because you've heard that they're overcrowded or you've seen too many pictures of it. I think just try to enjoy the moment. Even if there's a lot of people around, just experience it once if you have to, and like move on afterward.
All right. Well, before we go, tell everyone where they can find you and your artwork.
You can visit my website at rwongphoto.com. I also have another website called fineartphotographyprints.com. If you want to learn more about just prints and artwork in general, but the majority of my work and my time is spent on rwongphoto.com. And I'm also on all the major social media sites. If you want to follow me on Facebook, feel free to look me up there. Find me on Instagram. I'm also on Twitter. And if you're on my website, those are the social media links at the bottom of my website, if that makes it easier for you.
Okay, good. Well, thanks for getting together with me for the podcast. It's been great fun talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Kirby.
Oh, you're very welcome. So for those listening or watching, you can find the show notes at www.flanaganphotos.com. Both the video and the audio versions are available there as well. The video is also available on YouTube under Photographing the West, and it's the audio portion is on iTunes and most RSS feeds as Photographing the West. So take a look, tell your friends about the podcast if you've enjoyed it. We'll meet back here on July 15th for another episode where I interview another interesting photographer doing interesting things related to photography and life in general. So bye for now, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for listening to Photographing the West podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast in iTunes and leave us a review. Till next time, here's wishing you safe travels and good light.